This video deals with the concepts of multivalence, location, and community, and their interrelationship. The point is, it's not just about us. Professor Mark Powell asked his American seminary students why they thought the prodigal son got into such a mess. Their almost unanimous opinion was this: it was because he was so wickedly foolish in wasting his inheritance. Riotous living with prostitutes soon stripped him of all that he had prematurely inherited. And most of us in American culture would likely agree. But not everyone agreed. Later, Powell asked the same question of seminarians in St. Petersburg, Russia, the former Leningrad. Their view was that it was the severe famine in the land that caused the boy's miserable situation. Naturally so, perhaps, considering the horrific famine that Leningrad suffered in the 2.5-year Nazi blockade, when more than 600,000 of its civilians starved to death. Still later, Powell asked seminary students in Tanzania this same question. They answered that the boy suffered because no one gave him anything to eat. This would make sense too, since the cultural expectation in the Tanzanian location was that honor demanded strangers in need must be hospitably cared for. So which reading is right? Actually, all three of these readings are firmly rooted in the text. The boy did indeed, wickedly, waste his inheritance in dissolute living, although it's his older brother, not the storyteller, who accuses him of cavorting with prostitutes. Secondly, a severe famine did indeed strike the country. And third, the boy was indeed in need, and yet no one gave him anything. Powell's point is partly this, that there is not just one correct reading of this text. His point is also this, that each of these readings yields a different significance of the parable for the reading audience. We need to recognize the following, even if we have difficulty accepting it: that there are certainly wrong interpretations of particular scriptural texts. For example, Psalm 137 is no warrant for killing our enemies' babies. But we must also recognize that any given text is open to more than one legitimate interpretation. The idea held by some readers that there can be one and only one valid interpretation of a biblical text is simply unrealistic. Much of this phenomenon of multivalence comes with the further fact that varying real-life culture-embedded locations of readers legitimately predispose readers to see varying significances in biblical texts, whether those readers are highly independent, myopically money-minded Americans, Russians struggling with massive changes in a world long plagued by tyranny, war, and poverty, or tribal-oriented Africans in the poor rural savannah, thoroughly dependent on communal hospitality, or scholars, subsistence farmers, or members of a high school homecoming court, or members of the great unseen, which is where I spent high school. God's word addresses all humanity in all their diversity and need. Although we may think of our faith as highly individualist, the church's historic faith actually has to do with a community, a people. That people shows up in real locations as 2 or 3 gathered together, or as entire congregations, denominations, traditions, all of them stretching down the ages, at least from Abraham, and encircling the entire globe. The mind-boggling diversity within God's people, culturally, ethnically, historically, linguistically, socially, economically, is what drives the multivalence of God's Word to His people. Our task as responsible readers is to hear and perform God's transformative Word appropriately, whatever our location may be. It's more a task of distinguishing multiple valid readings from multiple invalid readings, and less a task of finding the one absolute correct reading, good for all readers in all locations. And that kind of task entails listening to the Word and to one another with critical openness.